after. All right, so welcome. We are going to discuss literature reviews. Hopefully this will be of use to you if you're taking a course, whether you're an undergraduate student, graduate student, or staff or faculty. So it's kind of a broad range. We're going to talk about an overview, and then we're going to discuss some specific examples. Feel free to type any specific questions you have as we go through in the chat, and we will either try to address them as we're discussing it on that slide, or we will also have some time at the end for some questions. All right, and so my name is Erin Durham. I'm a reference and instruction librarian, and I'll also turn the time over to my colleague to introduce himself.
Yeah, and I am Drew Alfgren, and I am also a reference and instruction librarian, and we both do primarily the humanities and some of the social sciences. And to disambiguate, do we want to talk about what type of literature review we're talking about right now?
Yeah, that would be great.
Because I do see some people from the natural sciences. So the type of literature review we're talking, there's two types of literature review you'll hear talked about. The one type that gets done in the natural sciences fairly frequently is when you go out and you try and find every article possible on your topic that has results, and then you try and collate those results and see whether there's points matching. That isn't what we're doing here. This is the type of literature review where you place your work into the larger body of disciplinary work that has gone before you and that you're trying to fit yours into.
Mm-hmm. And I will say also, we are going to focus on humanities and social science. There is a specific STEM literature review. So there's information on the workshop, which we'll send out a link to that. So you can also take a look at that as well. Although we are providing some high-level top-down overview of literatures in general. So this might also be useful to you, but our examples will come from social science and humanities. All right. So the type of literature review we're talking about is different from a systematic review. And that's comprehensive. That's all the literature out there trying to find points, as Drew was mentioning. The literature review we're focused on is situating your own research within the scholarship and the conversations that are happening. So a literature review will discuss arguments that scholars have made and are making. It's also going to analyze and synthesize that, and it's going to provide some evaluation, and it's going to provide you with a path to show how your research matters, what's significant about your contribution. Yeah, and that at the very bottom, that point, it just demonstrates that you're aware of the conversations that are happening. You have read the works of scholars in your field, and you're able to situate your own research and discuss its relevance, show that it's needed. So of course, this is very simplistic, general steps. You want to identify your research question, obviously. So a lot of you have put in some of your broad topics there, and so it's useful to know your area of research. And that also may narrow as you do research, as you look at the literature, that may be refined. You'll want to find your sources, identify them, and then organize and start to look for themes and patterns. This will help you as you write your review. So I like to think about a literature review to a conversation. You can think about, we're going to look at a few examples and just think about that. Feel free to put any of your thoughts in the chat in answer to the question, how is writing a literature review similar to having a conversation? So let's look at a few examples, and actually I can pop one of these into the chat. Here's an example of this first article we're going to. Let me pull that up. So this is from the Journal of Human Behavior and the Social Environment. just take a look. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. Okay. So this is looking at language brokering in different environments, family, academic. Okay, so generally there's going to be a clear space for the literature review. It's usually going to come towards the front of the article, and it's going to help situate the author's specific area of research. So for example, we have the introduction here, and then you can see some definitions, defining language brokering. Now, of course, for this part, for the definitions, they're going to be pulling from other scholars that have written in this area. And already you can see there's going to be a lot of citations here. You're going to see the discussion of past research. And there may even be some arguments going on or discussion. There may be scholars who have differing perspectives. And so that's going to be brought out in the literature review. The other thing about a literature review is there's probably many aspects of the topic. So this is a definition of language brokering. Further down, the authors have also discussed characteristics of language brokers, characteristics of language brokering as an act, and then some of the contextual antecedents. So in all of these sections, they're discussing the literature. They're discussing definitions that have come up, other scholars that have done work in this area, and kind of layering it in that way. And you can also see how they have grouped that literature review according to themes and topics. So this is something you can start to think about as you read the literature. How are you going to group the different scholars? What makes sense as far as the themes that are discussed? Let's take a look at another example. This is from a dissertation. Let's go here as well.
And even if it's not explicitly in the table of contents as a literature review, you will be able to recognize a literature review simply because it's going to be so citation heavy, and it's going to be talking about recent research and past research, and they're really visible. So
I'm going to go ahead and download it so we can see it a little better. Pull this up. And as Drew was saying, sometimes they're labeled literature review and other times they're not. So actually the article we just saw doesn't necessarily label it as a literature review. There's the introduction section, and then there's just different themes. But you can tell there's the literature because it's being discussed right here. There's all the citations. As you read it, you can see that they're pointing out the work of scholars from the past. So this is a dissertation example. And let's just take a look here. Usually dissertations are going to have a fairly robust table of contents, whether or not it's labeled literature review. Sorry, I'm going to find the table of contents. Okay, here we are. So there's the introduction, statement of problem, research questions, definition, etc. This one, in this case, it is labeled as a literature review. They're not always labeled that way, but this one is. And then you can see actually how they've broken it down into sub-themes. And this is a fairly organized dissertation table of contents. It's pretty specific. You have the whole section on culturally responsive pedagogy and then all the sub-themes there. And then over here, you have critical reflection and all the sub-themes there. Then you also have teacher identity and agency and the sub-themes that follow. So those are the three large categories in this literature review. And so the literature review itself, this is fairly comprehensive. This is about
that's 16. A wonderful example of a very comprehensive literature review. So
yeah, so that's like 60 pages of literature. This is, of course, for a dissertation. So this is a book length. Yeah. But it's nice to see how they're grouped into the themes that way. And maybe I'll just scroll just a little bit so we're into some of that literature review. Just take a look. Sorry. Let me find. Okay, so this was the setting culturally responsive pedagogy. And then from there, you can see all the citations and the discussion. And the whole point of the literature review is to show that this author has done their reading, they're aware of other scholars discussing this, and they're situating themselves within this conversation. All right. So finally, as we go back to that table of contents, after the literature review, then they're going to have the original research. They're going to have their methodology, their study design, and onward, data analysis, their key findings, right? So the literature review is there to really help frame the importance of their research and how it fits within the larger conversation. Are there any questions so far, or anything you'd like me to show? Any thoughts about this analogy? I really like thinking about literature reviews can feel very daunting because it's so much of a writing process, but I like to focus it on just the communication that's happening.
And honestly, conversation is a really important word to. You're going to be having conversations with your advisor. You're going to be having conversations with your fellow students. You're going to be having conversations with all sorts of people. So think of the literature review as just being a contextual conversation, putting you really focusing on putting your work into the larger body of knowledge that has gone before and that is continually ongoing, because you'll find people who are working on similar things from very different viewpoints than you are too. So conversation is a very important part of this.
There is there's a lot of text on this page, but this is an analogy. This comes from Kenneth Burke. But the idea that you're entering, a party, a parlor, and you come late, you arrive, you realize that people are engaged in a heated discussion, and so you listen in. After you've listened, you decide you kind of have a sense of where you want to step in, so you start contributing, and someone answers, and someone comes to your defense, and you kind of have a debate, and you realize that your time is up and you must leave, and so you depart. But as you head out the door, you're realizing that there's still conversation happening. And so as you're writing a literature review, just be aware that there are these conversations that have happened long before you have come along, and you're going to contribute something. And then as after you write your paper, publish it, do your work, there's going to be others that follow and may build upon your work, or may analyze it and evaluate it and interpret it in different ways. Yeah, and there's actually a comment in the chat. Nice. Yeah, so just an answer to how are literature reviews like conversations. Literature reviews also help readers familiarize themselves with the conversation. Absolutely. So you're learning about what opinions are out there, what different frames of analysis there are, what interpretations there are.
Oh, and especially for the historian in the group, the different methods of historiography. So, I mean, this is historians are a great example of you can work on the same topic from a variety of different positions, and that's what you really want to include in your lit review too. So you can say, if you're, and the people who are doing policy analysis, you can look at policy analysis from the level of the people who are writing the policy and studying the policy, and then also from the level of people being affected by the policy. So what lit you are using and the other literatures that have been developed in the bigger discipline are important to include. So
yeah, absolutely. You can start looking at grouping sub-themes, major themes, looking at the scholars across a specific period of time. And I like thinking also, just having some ideas as to ways to think about your lit review. It can be useful to start to group different discussions into themes and sub-themes. I like how there's dotted lines in this graphic because it shows that it's a little bit porous, right? There may be a little bit of overlap between, they're not entirely rigid, but it is helpful to start gathering your themes together. All right, we have some other images too. Let me go to the next slide.
And this one we borrowed from Dr. Musgrove in the history department. So, and this is the same kind of thing as with the bubbles, except the buckets are a little bit more well defined. So you're going to be putting in different takes. The different takes is important. So you're going to be in your disciplinary literature for sure, but then all the different ways that different people have approached your topic or the main themes in the topic, and what has worked, what has been well regarded, what has sort of fallen by the wayside as new scholarship has come along. That's a big part of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, don't do that. You know, if you ever wrote an eighth grade history paper, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, then it ended, the end. Don't do that. This is not what you're doing. So
And the problem, of course, here is that you're just summarizing, right? You're not providing any of your own analysis. You're not evaluating. You're not providing any of your own content either. Instead, what you should be doing is looking at the themes and how they are related to each other, how they're different. You're also really trying to set up your own research. So you really should be grouping the themes that are crucial to your research, your topic, and showing how you are unique, and also how you relate to the scholars that have come before.
yeah, anybody who's done a what do you call it? Not a book review. Um, I just lost it. An annotated bibliography.
Oh yeah.
That's an annotated bibliography is a great first step to doing a literature review, because you have to pick out things that you want to read that are in the discipline, and then you have to explain why you are adding this to your bibliography. This is the same kind of idea. This is saying, okay, this is the landscape of the research that I want to work in. And these are the various parts of it that are going to contribute to my work and that I'm going to try to develop. So think of it that way. Think of it as just saying, this is where things are now. This is where I hope to add.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, yeah, okay. So we've discussed kind of different analogies. We've talked about literature reviews as conversations. We've looked at them of like grouping themes into buckets or into thought bubbles. We've talked about the importance of analysis. If there's any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But the next portion of this, we're going to discuss different steps to writing a literature review. So of course, as you are working on your literature review, it's really important, as Drew was talking about, to have conversations with your advisor, other faculty members, people on your committee if you're working on a dissertation. If you're working on a literature review as a part of a class research paper, you'll definitely want to talk to your professor. And then the next step would be to choose the literature you will review. This is easier said than done. But we will show a few databases to look through, and honestly, just visiting the main search on the library is a place to start. But what you'll find is you're putting in search terms as you're looking at your topic, you'll start to identify descriptors and subject headings that would be useful to you So I would even just write down some of those search terms you're using. You'll also start identifying the authors who are writing. You might notice a name that keeps showing up, and that may be one of the main scholars in the area. So just keep a notebook, or just keep tabs of what is showing up as you're doing searches.
And just, you know, our situation now with being locked out of the library is problematic for getting hold of some things. But just think if the virus had gone the other way and the web was shut down for a year, your research would be much more difficult than it is now. So that would be like doing it old school. So
Yeah, most of what you'll be able to find the journal literature and the dissertation literature online,
yeah.
and we'll give some examples too for you. And so I actually find this third stage, the analysis part, to be probably one of the more time-consuming stages. This is when you're reading broadly, you're starting to identify interpretations, you're taking notes. You're also trying to get a sense of who is in agreement with each other, what scholars kind of are in the same area, who are working towards the same end, and then where are the disagreements. It's helpful to note conflicting theories, and also how different perspectives have changed over time. So for example, if you're looking at adult learning theory, you'll find that there are certain researchers who are in agreement and others who come in and propose different learning theories. So it's just helpful to find those scholars in your area and start to identify them. I think actually organizing can be kind of fun. This is where you go back through your notes, and you're starting to group into different themes. So depending on what you like to do with your studies, I usually just have my citations, and I do kind of a sort of annotated bibliography where I just write a paragraph based on the notes that I have. So I do my readings, I go back to my notes, I look through them. Some people color code their notes or put them on sticky notes and kind of group them on a whiteboard, whatever is useful to you. If you're working from home now, you can just put all your sticky notes on a wall. Or you can use a binder and kind of color code into different sub files, whatever is useful. But I find it helpful to start putting the categories together, start identifying themes, and then even just write a summary, or even bullet points, right, under each author as you're trying to identify how you're going to situate them. This stage also helps you with the next stage, which is developing your thesis. And that's really, even though you started out with your topic, you had selected a topic back at the beginning, you might have refined it by now. So you really want to write a concise statement, really limiting your scope and sharing your major contribution. This is how you are distinguished from all the rest of the scholars. What are you contributing that is different?
And this is where it's crucial to have an ongoing conversation with your advisor. This is where you want to be asking them, what should I be reading? Where should I be reading? Who should I be reading? As well, I mean, because there's a lot of literature out there. There is an enormous amount of literature in almost every discipline these days. So these are the people that are going to, your advisors and your committee are going to be the people who can tell you, go read this or go read that, see how that helps. Then, because that's going to inform your thesis. So, you're not going to want to redo other people's work, and you really want to, you'll find that disciplinary people who work in a discipline tend to like to see methodologies and conclusions that are aligned with the discipline. So you don't want to stray too far into interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary things because you want to be focused. So.
Yes, and it can be overwhelming, as Drew was saying. So you do want to start to narrow it down. Yep.
Yep.
And I'm just noticing in the chat, there is a nice comment there. UMBC's dissertation house uses an Excel spreadsheet to organize by patterns and themes to organize your lit review. So that's excellent. Yes, spreadsheets are great.
Yeah, and and we don't mention it much here, but the graduate school does have a lot of resources for helping with these things. So
yes, such as the dissertation house. So thanks for calling that out. Okay, so this is kind of the early stages where you're reading, you're searching, and you're starting to analyze and organize. Then you actually have to work on the writing stages for this. So this is where you're organizing your own paper. You're thinking about subheadings and headings, and then how you're going to progress through thematically and topically. And actually, the dissertation we looked at earlier, let me go back there. This gives, I mean, this just shows how well organized this writer was, right? Because they identified, so their topic is on culturally responsive pedagogy. What was their title? A narrative inquiry of second language teacher agency in promoting culturally responsive pedagogy. So that is their topic. And then what they did is they identified, abstract. Let me find the table of contents. They identified from that area what are the buckets? What are the themes that are useful that I need to have, that I need to discuss before I present my original research? So they picked culturally responsive pedagogy, they discussed critical reflection, and teacher identity and agency. So hopefully, as you're starting to write your notes down, as you're getting a sense of the different scholars, what you should be able to do is start writing your own headings and subheadings and identify those. And then finally, you will spend time writing. I always find it helpful to have an outline of the points I want to make. And then you're going to be discussing how the scholars are in conversation with each other and how your work fills gaps in the literature. Yeah, anything there? Anything you want to add, Drew?
no, just remember that you're doing all of this from the secondary literature. You're not concerned with primary sources at all. You're looking at what everybody else has written about your topic or whatever you're working on. You're not going to be looking at the actual data until you get into your research. You're looking at what everybody else has said about the research to date. So, or what they're working on now. So,
yeah, that's great. Thank you. And so I guess what we're going to do now is look at some examples. These are two examples of resources that we have online through the library. And we'll share out these slides as well. But we do have Sage Knowledge, and this is an excellent source, especially for social science. It has handbooks and encyclopedias. So if we do a topic on women and STEM, let's do a search.
yeah, this Sage Knowledge is the collection of Sage reference titles, handbooks, all of that. Not the journal lit, but the reference lit. So these are the ones that you're going to go in and look at for background information and pointers to other topics and the keywords and all that kind of stuff. Sage is a huge publisher in the social sciences, primarily, but also in the humanities and a little bit in the natural sciences. But you will find, throw keywords in here. If you have no idea, of only a big idea of what's going on, Sage does very high-end, academically appropriate reference material. So.
Yeah. And over on the left-hand side, you can start to explore this further. So if you're looking at, for example, like if you're doing a policy paper on women in employment, you can also just see what books are written about this topic. Just open that and just search books, and then you can just apply that filter. You can also include reference material. all reference. This will be encyclopedias and handbooks, etc. And then just click apply filter. And that will just narrow the search. So encyclopedia.
Excuse me, Aaron, can you go back one or go right there on the left? You see where that major works is checked off?
Yes.
They're doing part of the work for you by pointing out that they think that these 10, and if you can get to them, can you even get to, can you click on major works as a,
Yeah, I'm deselecting everything else
yeah.
and just clicking major works. Apply filter.
If it does anything. So. And then these will be the ones that Sage has developed a lot of interest. So they're already identifying titles you should be looking at. So
yeah. And life story research, psychology of prejudice. So those, if you're looking at prejudice of women in the workforce, these would be probably very useful.
mm-hmm.
All right. So you can definitely search by content type. You can also look by discipline. So a lot of these are coming from business and management, also counseling and psychotherapy, education. So a big range, right? But if specifically you're looking at it from a business perspective and management perspective, you could actually deselect the rest of these and just see the literature from that discipline, right? So, or if you're looking at it from public policy, you might want to just look at politics. What else would you do? Maybe leadership. So let's apply, filter. These are the sources coming out from the business.
So. But it's not only that, these titles are going to point you to other titles too, because if these are major works, these are going to be cited by others. So you can go in and you can look at both the bibliographies of these works and you can look at people who have cited these works. So it's a long chain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anything else? We could do another search or anything else?
Actually, Oxford Bibliographies might be a good one. So
yeah, let's do that example next. Oops, sorry. This is a good example of bibliographies on the topics that we have. So we currently have anthropology, social work, Chinese studies, medieval studies, Atlantic history, cinema, classics, and some art, right? So you may not have a topic that aligns there, but we're going to point out some of these because it provides a really nice example.
And bibliographies are not new. Bibliographies have a long tradition, and Oxford kind of revived these in an online digital format, but you will find bibliographies in the stacks for all sorts of topics. So don't ignore older bibliographies because they will give you access to literature that may or may not be in our databases because it is older than what the databases do. And most of our lit databases sometimes leave off early stuff. So
we're just showing this as an example. You can see that in this bibliography, it's solely dedicated to social work. But within, of course, social work is very, very broad. And so you can search within it here and look at a specific topic. So you could do
welfare.
Okay.
That's a big one. What it's going to look for is it's going to look for your keyword search, and then it's going to bring it up. And then for each entry, there is, pick one. So
we're going to do the history of social work and social welfare. And it's going to provide an introduction, a general overview. And this is the part where it's going to give you some of the major titles. This is Legacies of the War on Poverty from 2013. This is a new history of social welfare. Right? So you're going to have, scroll down, you're going to have major book titles. You're going to have reference works.
Yeah, if you look over on the left, you'll see there's general overviews, there's reference works, there's anthologies, there's selected, and that scrolls down. There's journals.
So if you're wondering about journal titles that focus on your area, of course, these are very broad. This is welfare, right? So you're going to have Journal of Progressive Human Services, Journal of Community Practice, but it is useful to know what are some of the major journals in a specific area. It's also going to highlight the keywords that you selected. So they're going to show up in the yellow. That's kind of nice as well.
And
right.
then related articles. I mean, that's another good thing. Everything's connected academically. So
yeah, and this little portion, Drew mentioned the related articles. So what you can do is select any of these, and it will pull in related literature. So there's a specific entry on international social welfare, if that's what you're interested in. It will pull you into that. You could look at, here's the title on the history of social work.
this is 1900 to 1950.
So using the Oxford Bibliographies can also help you hone into, it can help you broaden and just explore the range of where you could be focused in, but also identify some key research studies, some of the seminal works in your topic.
And hopefully we will be adding more of these as time goes along, but they are nicely done, and they do include both contemporary and historical material. So.
Now we're going to look at a database that can be useful on any topic. This is our ProQuest dissertation database, and it's going to focus on theses and dissertations. All right, and we have, I want to point out that we do have the national, international ProQuest database, but we also have the one focused on UMBC.
Please pay attention to that one, because if you want to get a sense of what others in your department have written on and how they have written, this is wonderful, because all the ones up through 2020 are in here now. So you can search by advisor, you can search by topic, you can search by date.
So this is all the UMBC advisors. So you can just select their name. And then if you're interested in looking by department, you can do that as well.
But that's a great way to get an idea of how others have done their literature reviews, how others have constructed their papers, because these are people who have gotten their degrees. This is work that has been successful. So, look at these to get an idea of what your department likes to see in a successful thesis or dissertation. But
yes.
And especially the larger one, even if nobody at our campus has written on something, look in the larger ProQuest dissertations, because somebody somewhere has. So
let's say that you are in the history department. You can click on department, and then you can write historical studies. Is that it, Drew?
Yep.
Historical studies. So you need the official name of the department.
Yeah.
And then we'll do a search there. So we have 151 results. These are all the results that are digitized, that are available online, and you can take a look at what has been written. This was published this past year, 2020. Okay, so just be aware that that is located, it's the second one down, it's the dissertation theses at UMBC. We're going to go to the general one. This has hundreds of thousands, not millions, of theses and dissertations around the world. And we can do language and acquisition and English. Okay, and let's just do that search. All right, so that's a very broad search. It's always useful to narrow down. You can take a look at your options over on the left, and you can definitely limit by publication date. Just look at the most recent, the last 11 years. So that did bring it down a little bit. Honestly, one of your best ways to limit is to think about the keywords you're using and to be more specific, right? So I'm interested in adult education, and we're going to search there. All right. So feel free to explore the dissertations that come up. What you do is just click, let's see, this one is reframing adult student success. I don't
Aaron,
see
show down. Just point out down below that they can get the abstract. They can get the full text, and they can also get the list of references if they want to.
Yeah, so underneath each of the titles, you can just click on any of these options. I'm going to go ahead and click on the title itself. And you can get a preview of the dissertation. It will just give you, oh, I see, this one was not full text.
It was.
Oh, no, it is. It is. So you do have the full text.
Yeah. Occasionally, you will find dissertations that are the full text has not been added because the author has asked that it not be included or it isn't included until 2028 or whatever. Usually that means they are in discussion with a publisher about creating a book. So,
Yeah.
or are working on, if in the hard sciences, ISCS, they could be working on something that they're going to convert to, they're going to monetize it in some ways. So it's not a huge proportion of the dissertations, but you will come across them occasionally.
Yeah. Do we have any questions, or is there anything we could look at someone's topic? Let me look back.
Why don't you throw that? We've got a couple people in there from that economic policy analysis. Why don't you throw that in there and see?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, that just seems very broad right now, but let's do general search. So we have economic policy analysis. Yeah, and so it'd be useful then to put your specific area there.
And that's one that you could say that, I mean, that's one that you could look at, that has economic policy has very broadly defined silos of literature. You have Marxist literature, you have Keynesian literature, you have all sorts of neoliberal literature in economic policy analysis. So, and they argue a lot about it. So,
Yeah, and even you can take a look on the left-hand side. You can look at the different disciplines and departments where the dissertation's coming from. And so we have economics, sociology, political science, right? So if you only want to see those coming out of an economics department, you can select that option here. It does narrow it a little bit. Sustainability and economic policy analysis. Although that's from 1993. So again, I definitely recommend limiting by the publication date as well. We also had someone who was looking at effectiveness of standardized test scores and graduation rates. And college specifically. And what's nice about dissertations is if you are trying to figure out a methodology or a method of data collection and analysis, dissertations usually will be very detailed and provide sometimes even the thematic codes that were used. It will definitely give you sometimes it gives you the raw data and then it shows the analysis that was performed. So they can be very useful.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if they are not providing the data, or if they are not providing links to the data, don't use it. I mean, or you can read it, but don't bother citing it because that's a little iffy. Um, but dissertations are wonderful. They are not necessarily the easiest things in the world to read, but as far as how to put one together and formats and literature reviews and especially the bibliographies, you cannot do much better than a good dissertation. So
Yeah. And I'm just noticing this one, we're looking at college graduation rates. So one thing you can do, we're getting a lot of high school and K through 12. So that's an opportunity to modify your search. And you can also do the advanced search just above. And what you can do, oh, this is taking my old search. Let me see. So we can do graduation rate and make sure that it's college or university. And then you can also add another row. Let's see, it was effectiveness of standardized test scores specifically. And you can see if you're interested in, like, I don't know if this topic's about coming into college, college admission standardized tests like the SAT and the ACT, and its impact on graduation, or if you're looking at test scores afterwards. But you can limit it. Right now, it's pulling up those keywords anywhere in the dissertation. But if you want to be more specific, you can ask that graduation rate shows up in the title
or the
or the abstract. I
yeah.
usually do abstract.
Yep.
So we'll go ahead and do that. So this is just a way to,
David's I'm sorry, David Sears just asked a question about, do we contact a librarian if our search term does not yield anything? Yeah, if you're constructing your search too narrowly, that can be a problem. I can't if your topic is very, very new, that might be a problem. If you are very, very narrow, that can be a problem. But you have to remember you're working from the published literature. So if you're not finding any literature, then really you either have to broaden your topic or maybe pick something else because you're not going to have anything to cite. So unless you are actually going to do all of your research directly with the public, you're not going to have anything. So
yeah, and actually that's a great point, Drew. And something that also comes to my mind, going back to just the one we've been using as an example, if the person starting out, like before, at the very beginning of their program, they knew that they wanted to talk about second language teacher agency and promoting culturally responsive pedagogy. But they weren't able to find something about all those things, right? What they ended up doing is looking in the literature, identifying different aspects of that and identifying, oh, I'll look at the literature on this aspect of it. I'll look at the literature review on critical reflection. I'll look at teacher identity. And then the rest of the dissertation is putting all those themes together. So you may find that as your very specific niche topic may not have articles about it, but what you want to do is just broaden it a little bit and look, take a step back and see at what point is it being discussed in the literature review.
oh yeah, and especially and the words that you are using in class now for your current conversations may not be the ones that they used a decade ago or 20 years ago. You may want to use pedagogy or teaching style or pedagogy and teaching theory, that kind of thing to see what comes up because the words that are currently popular may not be the ones that were popular before. So the lit does evolve and the vocabulary evolves. So
Yeah, and in fact, let's just take a look back at the dissertation search ProQuest. The nice thing about the advanced search is you can start to group synonyms. So graduation rate or, well, that one is fairly college or university or higher education.
Mhm.
You can start to group synonyms together, if that makes sense. Or if you're looking specifically at the SAT, then just put it in there.
Or you could just put testing in there.
Yes. Yeah. So I would start more specific, but if you're not finding anything, that's an opportunity to
Yeah.
think of other synonyms and other keywords that you could use.
And can you go over to the right, Aaron, and do the drop down again?
Yeah, let's see. To the right.
Just words
Oh,
for
yes.
abstracts now.
Yes.
Just
Yep.
you can see that there's author, there's text, there's title, there's keywords, there's the subject headings in here are a little bit iffy. They're kind of different than the ones that you find in the disciplinary, in the databases, the journal literature databases. These are a little broader, so you can use them. They're just be aware that they're not quite as specific as the ones that you'll see in the indexing terms, the descriptors you'll see in the disciplinary databases. So,
Yeah. I mean, you can always start anywhere. It will show up anywhere in the text. And then you can, if you're not finding useful things or relevant things, you can start to be a little more specific, is what I'd recommend. Yes, and there's a comment too, how some words might have multiple meanings, like scholarship. It could be how well someone is studying. It could also be financial aid. So just be aware that there's going to be a lot of different meanings coming out. And so you'll have to sift through those results and determine what is the most relevant and useful.
and donor engagement, that you can, that's another wonderful term that you can interpret many different ways or apply many different definitions to. So,
Yeah, thank you. Were good examples. And don't be frustrated as things come up. Your search process is a journey, and so you can always narrow and refine as you go. That is totally normal.
yeah, the thing I would say is if you are searching on a term and you get nothing in the lit, you're either spelling it wrong or it's so new that nobody has written about it yet, which would be kind of hard to do, or so narrow that nobody has written about it yet, because it does take somebody else having an interest in the topic in order for there to be literature. So,
Yeah. All right. We are about time, and Drew, I will need to teach a class at 1, but we could maybe very briefly hop onto Web of Science.
yeah, Web of Science very briefly, and it works best for the natural sciences. It does work okay in the social sciences. The humanities people may want to try something else. This works completely from citations. So if you have an article that you find very useful, you can put the title in there, or you can put a topic in here, and then what you'll see is this.
Oh, sorry. No results because I spelled it wrong.
Yeah.
So there's an example for you.
Yeah. So at the top, you can see this the default for Web of Science is by date. So you'll see that new stuff that got published in November, December 2020 has no site. Nobody else has cited that. See over on the right, because they haven't had the time to write anything yet. But if you go to the top again, Aaron, click on the time cited. Okay, these are the ones that are going to be your seminal articles, your major articles. See how many times that one has been cited. Of course, it has to be on your topic, but you can see this. You'll see these are the ones that you want to pay closer attention to because so many others have read and cited it. So.
Yeah. You can also look at the highly cited in the field and select that and refine your search that way. And of course, that's going to give you some of those that are considered a highly cited paper. This was only published in 2019, but it's already been cited 34 times. So that can be useful to note. So there are links on these slides, and we will be sending them out. We'll also send out our recording. But just know that as you have questions, you can feel free to use the library chat, or you can set a virtual appointment, or you can email either one of us. If you're doing the library chat, it would just be this little chat box on the side that will pop up. And you'll just click there. It's usually over here on the sidebar. So we also just want to put up our email addresses, and you can feel free to email us if you have specific questions. We're happy to work with you one-on-one on your topics.
Yeah, and if you have to bow out, Aaron, go ahead. I got the count, and I'll put in the stats. If anybody has questions, just stick around. I can stay for another 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for all who've come. I'll go ahead and stop the recording, and I'll send that out after.